Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Prime Live. Now, back with us this evening is Brendon Petersen to explore the fascinating world of South Africa's emerging AI landscape. With local players like Nova making waves in the industry, we're excited to tap into Brendon's wealth of knowledge about the current state of AI, its potential for innovation in our country. Thank you so much for joining us on Prime Live, Brendon, and welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Now, can you tell us how would you describe the state of AI in South Africa currently?
If we look at AI in South Africa, I think that sector is in a high growth, high sort of imagination phase. So, as I think it is with many places around the world, it's not yet mature. But what is setting us apart, from the rest of the world is that we're looking at using our AI and building our AI from the ground up. So looking for solutions to the problems or circumstances and situations that are unique, to South Africa. And it's very often young founders who are working with, unfortunately, very minimal resources, but a maximum amount of urgency. So I think that really sort of sets us apart. We've got some great startups in South Africa who are really pushing the industry forward.
Hmm. Are there any areas that you think we are leading currently, and is there still room for us to grow?
Oh, yeah, no, this is such a new technology, not just in South Africa, but around the world. There's massive amounts of room for growth in infrastructure and in scale. But I
Mm.
think, if we look at two sort of key areas, so language AI, we've got companies like Putlali AI is one of the few companies that's building advanced speech models for African languages. And I think that puts us ahead of the of most of the world. And then I think if we look at culturally intelligent AI, so there's a new one people have been talking about, Kaya. And this is another AI system that also, focuses on language, or at least involves language, and is able to speak all 11 official languages of South Africa and mirrors a lot of our culture. So it shows, if you look at those two, for example, shows we're not just copying Silicon Valley or Europe. We looking at innovating at what is relevant for us, what's socially conscious, what's deeply local, and what it should look like for us in South Africa.
Mm. And Nova is one of the companies on everybody's radar in South Africa right now. What do you think sets Nova apart from other, local AI startups? And what can other companies learn from the approach to innovation?
I think the story of Nova is not just it's not just the story for other companies. It's a story for, I think, all of us, almost in everyday life. Because I think what makes it stand out is they didn't wait for the perfect conditions. These are not people who studied all the things, knew all the things, and then decided to build Nova. It was built with 700 rand, secondhand PC, and teaching themselves how to code by watching YouTube videos. Now it has over 100,000 users, and I think its real sort of power lies in its hyper local relevance. So looking at what are the issues, what can we do to solve these issues? It doesn't have to be the perfect solution, but let us start somewhere. It's designed to solve a real problem. Obviously in this case, education for real students in real schools. So I think
Mm.
the key takeaway, for other companies, other startups, I think just us as people is focus on solving actual problems before you're looking at chasing hype. You don't need the perfect conditions, the perfect anything. You need purpose, and you need, proximity to the people you're building for. Know what you're trying to solve and understand the people you're trying to solve the problem for.
Mm, definitely. Now, what are some of the common challenges that AI startups face in South Africa, and how can they avoid them or overcome them?
I think funding is always going to be one of the big ones. There's limited amounts of funding. I think also if you look at, whether it's AI, whether it's many other, tech startups, there's a lack of local data sets. Most of our data in one form or another is controlled or managed, through international companies. And I think that's a problem. I think we've got a lot of infrastructure gaps, and I think we have a massive shortage of AI skill talent. Just months ago, last year into this year, people were talking about the skill shortage when it comes to cybersecurity. I think we now also have a skill shortage when it comes to AI talent. But again, if we look at companies like Kaya AI, like we look at Putlali AI, I think we look at yes, there are these challenges, but again, these challenges do not need to be the things that completely stop us as a country, as a people, to make these moves forward. It looks at these are the issues. What can we do within these constraints that we have?
Mm. Are there any particular sectors or industries where AI is particularly well suited?
So many, so many. I think if we look at Nova, for example, education. Education's a massive one. Obviously making that content available, more accessible, and more engaging because not everyone learns the same way.
Mm.
And I think we need to be even more conscious of that now than we've ever been before. And I think if we look at South Africa, one of the big sort of industries that we're in is, call centers, customer contact centers,
Mm.
and customer service. And Botlali AI, for example, is transforming how these companies are interacting with clients in their home languages. Because I think one of the big things is being able to access information and content in a language that feels natural to you, in something that is your home language, because not only does it create a sense of connection, but it also deepens understanding. So I think that's definitely something. And then, service delivery. So imagine what you could do with, culturally aware assistants, in government, in healthcare, social services, able to answer questions in a language that you understand instead of forcing you to try and understand a language that maybe doesn't feel,
Mm.
or sound natural to you, and then you're missing key information along the way.
Mm. And just talking about AI in education, it's obviously something that has potential to grow. Do you see this growing a lot in South Africa to a point where now AI people are partnering up, AI companies are partnering up with universities, colleges, etc.?
Yeah, a lot of the AI companies I've spoken to, whether local, international, this is always something they could thought of at one stage or another. And we need to democratize AI education. I think when we look at these new technologies, it's always these wonderful things that are being done around the world. We never look at local, so South Africa, the global South, and how we can actually bring these things to the people who actually need them. We talk about these wonderful things that'll solve all these big problems, but don't necessarily address key problems, key root infrastructure issues, education issues. So I think, yes, from a university level, I think that's definitely a possibility. But I think we even need to look at, high school, onwards. We need that sort of cross-pollination. We need, startups like Nova to show universities how to build, education that speaks to the students who are gaining, speaks to, high school students, as well. We need to have universities give access to the research muscle and those are the things that they have to be able to validate the data that they have. Corporates and government, I think, need to also collaborate to help fund that and help scale that. So, I think it's definitely on the cards. I think it's just a question of when and how.
Mm. What do you think are some of the disadvantages of having AI take over our education sector?
Well, you see, I think that's the key thing. Yeah, people hear about these technologies and they think takeover, but I don't think that takeover is the thing. I think we need to look at these technologies as either assisting or enhancing and enabling.
Mm.
Because to take over is not something we should let any technology do, whether it's AI, whether, it's computers or anything else. But what we can do is find ways to address the gaps that we've missed. So like I said, languages, for example, because access to education in a language you understand
Mm.
is going to mean, more potential growth opportunities for you as a person, for communities.
Mm.
And we've missed a lot of the gaps. So I think don't look at it as a replacement, look at it as an enhancement and as an enabler to be able to educate and empower more people.
Mm. But I think the word takeover maybe comes from a place of credibility. Like, what happens when AI is the only thing people are focusing on? Yes, there are the good sides of AI that you're speaking
Mm,
about, but there's also the ugly sides of AI. And I think also, as much as we're speaking about the advantages and how good it is for society, there should be some kind of ugliness that could potentially come out from having AI fully be
mm.
activated in our educational system.
And you're very right to call that out. I think there's a very real concern there, and I completely understand where that comes from,
Mm.
myself included. Because, it's something I also wonder and think about. But I think, as with any technology, let's look back to what maybe back in the day we would have thought of as harmless, social media. Oh,
Mm.
I'm just sharing my thoughts and my day and, the cup of coffee I drank or whatever. Now it's become this tool where people have been able to, unfortunately, in certain cases, weaponize it against other people, whether it's just I don't like this person, or I don't like something else, and the algorithms then have sort of fed that sort of engagement because algorithms don't care whether it's good or bad engagement, it's engagement, and we unfortunately as a society have also contributed to letting this happen. I'm not saying that the blame lies entirely on the people, but at the same time, we have chosen convenience and not doing anything about it because, oh, it's entertaining, and it's
Mm,
just it's harmless. It's not going to do anything. It's online. It's not the real world.
mm,
Now with AI, all of a sudden realizing that what's online
mm,
is actually part of the real world.
mm,
So I think we've got to use that knowledge that we've developed, speak to governments, speak to these companies and essentially, shall we say, I don't want to say use the word boycott, but call out. Say this is not acceptable. We as a people don't find this acceptable. Call
mm,
out, for government to put down stronger legislation in place because at the end of the day, these things only exist because we've given them the license to exist. If we as a people stop using these services, they stop existing. These algorithms stop feeding themselves. And I think it's the same thing with AI. Yes, we don't want it to take over, but the reality is this is the world that we live in. We've got to figure out how to work with it as it is. I think back in the day when the printing press was invented, people were already complaining that, oh, look at how that automation is taking away jobs. It's the same conversation now, just for something that unfortunately is far more advanced, but we as the people still have the power to do something about that.
mm. Most definitely. What do you think South Africa can do to ensure that the development of AI remains ethical and also inclusive for everybody?
I think that's such an interesting question because um, I think we need to sit down and address the question of what does ethical actually mean to all of us? Because I think
Mm,
over the last couple of years, a lot of things that maybe were not acceptable before, we've now allowed to become acceptable. Just as a sort of almost silly example, I was watching a TikTok the other day with Kiki Palmer, and she was talking to someone about back in the day, you know, if I didn't, for example, like a jacket someone was wearing, I
mm,
wouldn't go up to them to their face and say, "Oh, your jacket is horrible
mm,
and ugly and unattractive and whatever. Why would you
mm,
buy this?" I
mm,
would maybe just say to a friend, "I don't like this," and move on with my life.
mm,
Now we take to social media and we try to drag that person down, get other people involved because we have a point to prove.
mm,
So I think we've allowed a lot of things to become acceptable that are not, and I think we need to really start looking at that. And I think in terms of inclusivity, I think we've forgotten what that word means. I think people unfortunately look at inclusivity as meaning if other people have access, that means I have less access, and that is not the truth. I firmly believe in that saying of a rising tide lifts all boats or all ships. We grow together, we empower each other, and create more. And I think we need to sit down as people and really sort of look at how we address these things. And just as an example, talking about what you were saying about AI, I'm actually sitting in China at the moment. And if you look at a service like ChatGPT and a lot of these AI platforms that we are so used to, it's not available in China. Government didn't allow it, in this country because it's not a locally grown thing. They've obviously got their own alternatives like DeepSeek and so many others, and they were just like, "This is not for us. This is not for our people. That doesn't speak to who we are as a people, as a society, as a government." And whatever you feel about the Chinese government, that just shows these governments and the people do actually have the power to make these decisions and these movements and change these things if they feel it's in the interest of themselves and their people.
mm. And what is your, in terms of the vision for South Africa in the AI industry,
Mhm.
what is your vision for the next 5 to 10 years, and how can people or South Africans make sure that we are leading in the space of AI in the next coming 5 or 10 years?
So I think to answer this question, we need to address the thought that South Africa is not as technologically advanced as we are.
Mm,
Obviously, China is so much further ahead of many countries in the rest of the world. But having traveled as much as I have, I've been able to go overseas and see, for example, if we look at sort of mobile, and mobile banking and things like maybe not Apple Pay, but financial services. We're so much further ahead of so many other countries. I was in New York about, I think, maybe 3 years ago, about 2 years ago, I think it was. And about a week before I landed, there was an announcement that only then, it's about 2023, give or take, it might be 2022, but 2023, I think was the year. where they finally got tap to pay services for their metro. And I looked at this and I was like, what do you mean you've only gotten tap to pay now? In South Africa, tap to pay has been such a normal thing for many of us via an app or whatever. We forget how far ahead we are of so many other countries in terms of tech. And I think we have that possibility and opportunity again to leapfrog when it comes to AI. So we could become, if not a global hub, at least, a hub for the global south for ethical AI.
Mm,
We could become a leader for multi-language, multilingual language models. We're not the only country where English is not the primary or only language. There's so many other countries around the world where, unfortunately, most of the technology is created in English, but most of the world does not speak English. We
mm,
could be at the forefront of that.
mm,
We could become a go-to market for AI made for majority of the world, not just for the global north. So I think we've got all of these opportunities, but we need governments to sit down, work with the corporates, work with the startups to be able to open data initiatives for African languages and local use cases. Owning our own data. We need support for AI research and development and infrastructure, and we need cultural shift. So that when we see problem solvers like Nova, Vitali AI, even Kaya,
mm,
these need to be seen as national assets. These are important things, not just, oh my word, these are wonderful, but these are once-off things. We need more things like this. We need more use cases. Today, I was just sitting with one of the biggest tech content creators in China, and this guy employs 80 people, has full backing from the local government, from the local businesses, and these local businesses are things like your Huawei's, your Honors, your Xiaomi's, your BYD's, who've helped this guy not only become as big as he is by giving him access to technology and devices and information, but have also allowed him to become an employer that is now employing 80 other people who are also now potentially doing their own things. Why don't we have any of those sort of things sitting in South Africa that empower these entrepreneurs and creators in these emerging fields where we have an opportunity to leapfrog like we've done with so many other things? I think those are the things that I would like to see happen in South Africa over the next 5 to 10 years, and I think we can do it.
mm. I mean, Brendon, thank you so much for unpacking this topic on a focus on the local AI and how we can better ourselves in the industry, but most importantly also covering Nova and the waves that it's making. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much again for having me.
Thank you. Viewers at home, this was a very interesting conversation that I just had with Brendon regarding a focus on local AI, and I hope this also left you feeling inspired in terms of the direction that we are headed into in terms of South Africa AI as a whole. But without wasting any time, let's go to a quick ad break. We'll see you right after this.